This is your tech news briefing for Friday, July 1st. I'm Julie Chang for The Wall Street Journal, filling in for Zoe Thomas. Elon Musk and Twitter have been in talks about a $44 billion acquisition since April. So, 3 months in, what's the holdup? The Tesla and SpaceX CEO has said there's 3 issues standing in the way: lining up financing for the deal, winning shareholder approval, and bots. He thinks Twitter is rife with fake accounts, so much so that he put the deal on hold while demanding the company turn over data on its fake or spam accounts. Now, some have speculated that the move was an attempt at renegotiating or scuttling the deal altogether. Whatever the case, in recent weeks, Musk got that data. But how useful was it to him really? And where does the deal go next? Here to help answer those questions is WSJ tech reporter Sarah Needleman, who's been following the story. Hi, Sarah. Thanks for coming on the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So Elon Musk got what he asked for from Twitter. He got this huge data dump. Exactly how much data are we talking here?
So he received historical tweet data and access to the company's so-called fire hose of tweets. The fire hose shows the full flood of tweets. And keep in mind that people post about hundreds of millions of times a day on the platform, according to the company. And he's accessing this data in near real time. So it's a large volume of information.
And what was included in that data?
It's really just tweets and the timestamps and dates of when those tweets were put out. So there aren't any direct messages, for example, DMs. It doesn't include any personal or private information from users like their IP addresses or email addresses. So it's really just tweets and their timestamps.
Since it's just tweets and timestamps, can that information actually be used to identify bots? And if so, how accurate would that be?
Well, you could use it to find some bots. What some of the experts I spoke to say, they described it as low-hanging fruit. So these would be obvious instances of bots just by, looking through the data. Certainly, if a particular account is tweeting more times in a short period than a human possibly could, that's a good indication of a bot. But it also could dig up bots that are arguably useful, ones that just post, say, weather alerts or photos of cute animals. It would miss sophisticated human-like bot behavior because you really need some of that personal data to cross-check to make sure a user is human or not. And these bots are very sophisticated. And so to go through at least in a short period of time, because we know that Twitter shareholders are voting on the deal later this summer. So he is strapped for time to go through it and parse that data to figure out which accounts may be bots, and not just bots in general, but ones that are spewing spam as opposed to, like I said, helpful information like weather alerts.
So that actually raises another question. How do you determine what's considered a fake or spam account or not?
Right, there's no standard industry definition. So if Mr. Musk and Twitter were to compare, say, just analysis of the fire hose data and nothing else and keep it more of an apples to apples comparison, they would have to agree on what constitutes a bad bot or malicious behavior and come across some sort of a universal definition. And this goes back to the point that we're saying that when Twitter comes up with its estimate, it does have access to that personal data we talked about earlier, and that's something Mr. Musk doesn't have. And Twitter also uses humans, employees, to analyze the fire hose data, and that's something Mr. Musk wouldn't be able to replicate. So the comparison to Twitter's process for estimating spam on its platform isn't something that Mr. Musk or really anyone could easily replicate.
So Elon Musk got this data. What does that mean for the deal? Because he's been saying that he thinks the bots make up about 20% of accounts. Twitter has said they only make up 5% of accounts. So would this discrepancy be enough grounds for him to pull out of the deal?
He could try, but again, he has to come up with a number and share the process for coming up with it and making a convincing argument that whatever he finds is perhaps a more accurate number, or that Twitter was either dishonest or just did a poor job of assessing its platform. And again, that's very difficult to do when you can't compare to their process that's done internally. Another factor to consider is that Twitter's number is based on its population of monetizable daily users. And we also know that many people log on to Twitter just to repost. They don't actually tweet themselves. That's a significant share of the platform's users. And that points to another limitation of the fire hose data, because that could meaningfully affect how percentages of users are calculated. So the experts I spoke to say it would be surprising that if he comes up with a different number, it may not be enough to change the course of the deal or the terms of the deal.
And what happens next in the deal? You mentioned that there's going to be a vote later in the summer. Is there anything else that we can look forward to?
That is a major next step, but we're talking about someone who has surprised us in many instances over these last few months. So we have to see if Mr. Musk will come forward and say that his team has come up with a different number, and perhaps he will argue that Twitter's process was faulty. But again, it's difficult to know exactly whether or not that would be enough to change the course of the deal, given the factors we talked about earlier. So it remains to be seen. But the next step that we know about being on the books or being on the record is this upcoming shareholder vote. So between now and then, it's anyone's guess as to what Mr. Musk might say at an event or on Twitter itself. Speaking of which, Mr. Musk hasn't tweeted since June 21st. So as of Thursday, that would be 9 days, and pretty unusual for Mr. Musk, who is known to be a serial tweeter. And the fact that he's been quiet is very interesting, or it's at least somewhat surprising. So all eyes are on that platform to see what he says next and when he says it next. We're talking about a person who's known for making news based on a single tweet. And now we're saying there's news, and the fact that he hasn't tweeted is in itself also pretty interesting.
I agree. That is pretty interesting. All right. That was our tech reporter, Sarah Needleman. Sarah, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And that's it for Tech News Briefing this week. We had production assistance from Ariana Aspuru. We had editorial support from Scott Salloway. Our supervising producer is Chris Zinsley. Our executive producer is Kateri Yoakum. And I'm your host, Julie Chang, filling in for Zoe Thomas. A quick programming note, we'll be off on Monday for Independence Day, but we'll be back in your feed on Tuesday. Thanks for listening, and have a great weekend.